In your opinion, what do young people, so I'm considering people under the age of 25, not fully realize about being a Hollywood director?
No, that's actually it's an interesting question. I don't know. I mean, being slightly older than 25, I don't know if I know, certainly everything there is to know about what it means to be a Hollywood director. I think there are just different tiers of it. Like when you deal with, I don't think you can really understand how the industry works until you get inside of it, and then you realize how many people are inside of this calling the shots. It's almost like what they say about the president. It's like the perception of the president is that he's in control, and then they tell you, oh, when you get elected president, they take you in a room, they open the door, and they go, you see these three guys? These are the real guys that are making all the decisions for the country. Now, whether or not that's true, there certainly is an enormous amount of politics involved in Hollywood filmmaking, that it's at a much higher level than the independent level, because at the independent level you're dealing with fewer politicians, you're dealing with fewer executives, you're dealing with, depending on the budget and how you make your independent movie, but certainly if you raise your movie independently, or financing independently, you're not dealing with an army of executives that are weighing in at every conceivable stage, whether it's the writing stage, which certainly that can be, if you ever, Google Patton Oswalt's, bit about what it is to be in the development process in Hollywood, and he gives a very sort of simple and hilarious example of what it's like. It's like at a certain point you want to take a knitting needle and just drive it through your eye into your brain, not simply because the notes are, that you're getting notes, full stop. It's that oftentimes the notes are just inane. Like he does a bit, I can't remember, I'm not doing it verbatim, but he says, the executive going, on page 3, he's got pants on, but at page 7, he's got a hat. What? That's a problem, we gotta, that kind of thing. So being able to withstand the level of inanity, the level of interference, full stop, whether the comments, and that's not to say some notes can't be brilliant and totally advance a movie, but the idea that there's so much money is at stake on a Hollywood movie that the oversight can be overpowering. And that is, oversight is not the ally of art, Going back to what we were saying earlier, limitations and things like that, parameters and having to fight your way within certain, that can be the whole necessity is the mother of invention kind of thing. But I think in Hollywood filmmaking, I think that the level of interference throughout the entire process is at such a level that you have to be prepared to be okay with that level of interference in your creativity. Not only okay, you have to know how to manage that and politically, engage and make those people feel that they're part of the process and not an interfering element, and all these things. And that's something that a young filmmaker who has not yet stepped into that arena may not be prepared for. And in the times when I have done films or for the studios or shows for the networks, and that surfaces, which it always does, different and totally different from when, like, say, I made Some Guy Who Kills People, which was just me and Ryan effectively making our movie. It always surprises me. I always go, oh, fuck, I forgot. And not only did I forget how much I hate this, and how I got to deal with this now. And any filmmaker who says that they don't have a problem with that kind of meddling, and maybe meddling's the wrong word, because they can always say, look, we fucking paid for your movie, so Sure. We're entitled to meddle. So don't give me that. You're not, and they would be right to a certain extent. But if any filmmaker who says that doesn't bother them at times is lying. And you have to find a way to manage that.
Do you think that's what separates the people that cross over from the indie world to the professional, quote unquote, is that ability to take the meddling?
Yes.
Because it's that well, I don't want to be structured, I don't want to be boxed in, I'm an artist, I can't.
Yeah, I definitely think that. I think the ability to make that transference, if you do get in a situation where you're independent film is so well received and you win all the awards and it fits the particular genre that a studio goes, hey, you know what? He would be great to direct the next Alien movie. Let's get him. You definitely have to be able to fit into the way that particular game is played. And not just fit, but be a willing participant and not an adversary. Because no studio wants a pain in the ass director who's like fighting every note, and nobody wants that hassle. So the directors that I know that I came up with that have done well in that world are not only the kinds of filmmakers that want to make the kind of material that a studio wants to make, but they're also able to they're very talented in those kinds of dealings. And they're okay with it. Like it doesn't kill them.
Right.
It doesn't break their spirit. I've always envied that. Like wow. I would love to not be so hurt by somebody changing my thing. To be okay with that.
Do you think some people are just born with that ability to flow with it?
I think so. I think it has to do with your personality. I think it has to do with your upbringing.
Yeah.
It's weird. I think the personality of a director is look, what does a director do fundamentally? Fundamentally, that's what Coppola said in Hearts of Darkness. He said that the director is one of the last dictatorial posts available as a job, right? So a dictator is like, do what I say. A dictator is somebody who, wants it his way. He's a king, or God. So that attracts a certain control freak personality, of which I'm definitely one. But how many gods are there allowed? But when you're making a film for the studios, you're like the god, sorta, on paper. But there's a whole bunch of gods that are much more powerful than you that have a big say in what the final thing is. So you're not God. You're God it says directed by, but you're not God. And if you're the writer, it's even worse. Like I'm sure writers, so many writers will tell you, yeah, I wrote the first draft, but there were 14 more drafts and 7 more writers before it finally. So imagine, that's why so many poor writers are like, let me direct, even if they're not necessarily even if it's not their wheelhouse, they still want the control. Or the illusion of control, because they don't want their ideas diluted to that extent.
Right.
So yeah, I think that and I've learned to compartmentalize. I think the way to do it is to totally understand that in a studio or network environment that you are part of the controlling element, but not the controlling element, and that it's definitely a team effort in that world, and you have to be okay with that. And I am okay with that when I identified that this is that situation. But I would be lying also to say that I don't relish the ultra low budget independent experience where even though I don't have all the toys and the salary and any of that stuff, maybe I'm not even getting paid at all, but even more gratifying is the fact that right or wrong, I'm calling the shot, and it may not work, but at least it was my call, is something that I think is valuable to me.
Right, and that goes back to what you were saying about the masterpiece that's up there somewhere that we all kind of have that maybe we can't make for lack of money or whatever it is, but look at like the documentary that was so interesting, Jodorowsky's Dune. I don't know if you saw that documentary, but Alejandro Jodorowsky, the great crazy filmmaker, was going to make Dune in the 70s. This is before Star Wars, and his documentary tracks how he created this incredible design and an insane vision, and for the studios, and it almost got made, and at the last minute it didn't happen. And many of the design ideas and the artists that worked on that ended up bringing those ideas into films that did get made, into Ridley Scott's Alien. H.R. Giger was originally, who designed the monster for Alien, was originally on board for Dune. So many of the conceptual artists that created the spaceships for Dune, again, the movie didn't get made, ended up working on Star Wars. And so all of these sort of images and ideas that he had fabricated,
that didn't find their way into this realization, found their way into other movies. And he has this book he storyboarded it, and it's like, it's like one of those things, like it's so beautifully realized in storyboard form. It's like monks have, like it's that kind of thing. And Nicholas Winding Refn, who is a friend of his, is in the documentary, and he talks about how he's one of the few people that has seen Dune, in that he went over to Jodorowsky's house and he said, "Do you want to see Dune?" And he's like, "What do you mean? You didn't make it?" He goes, "Oh, but look." And he brings this Dune book out, and he goes in, and Jodorowsky tells him what he was going to do as Nicholas Winding Refn goes board by board. And he says, when it's over, he says, "I've seen the movie." So it's a fascinating story about, like, once it's a tragedy that it never became put on film, and at the same time he found a way to set it down somehow so that it's still been realized in some form as opposed to not at all. It's very interesting. It deals with that whole thing that you're talking about. Like, you have this thing in your head.
Right.
If you don't actually get to make it, is there some other way that it can exist? Or does it already exist? Does it already exist even in your head? Is that still valuable? Or if the script just exists, is that valuable? I think you have to, you'll kill yourself. You'll kill yourself if things that don't happen, that you think only can be realized in this certain way, and if they don't happen that way, and you've made it that way, that it's only going to be good if it gets done this way, I think it's a way you start chipping away at your own spirit. I think we have to, all filmmakers have to find a way of being, of finding a way of realizing these things that may not get made exactly as they. And I think this happens a lot. I think, just like, for example, I remember I wrote a script that I thought I was going to direct. And it was a very interesting true crime story that I was hired. And it was interesting. Again, it was one of these situations where somebody said, "You've worked with us before, we want to do another movie with you, but we want to do a true crime story of, like, a serial killer that hasn't been told before." So I was like, "Oh, okay, I'm not like a serial killer, like, historian, but I'll come up with something." And I found an amazing story about a serial killer whose best friend was actually the cop investigating his crimes. It was like this fascinating story about betrayal, and it was true, and I wrote this thing, and I fully expected to direct it. And I had this elaborate ending where the two confront each other in a drive-in movie theater. I'd always wanted to set a scene in a drive-in theater. I thought it was just interesting. And anyway, long story short is, at the 11th hour, I was removed from directing it because they sold the rights to the script that I had written to another company. Somebody else came in and made the movie, and they made it even at a lower budget than they wanted to. And the end of in addition to it being sort of a mess on all levels, the end of the movie, which takes place in this drive-in theater, of course takes place like in a warehouse, because that's the de facto low budget. Of course it takes place in a warehouse. And then I realized that, 4 years later, when I was making Some Guy Who Kills People, that there was room for enhancing some of these murder scenes. And sure enough, the drive-in movie theater setting found its way into Some Guy Who Kills People. So it may not be, that's a minor thing, but I think, if ideas are really important, or characters, or certain shots that may have been intended for a particular project that didn't get made, you owe it to yourself to try to insinuate that stuff. Because really, it's just stuff that needs to come out of you as an artist. You're like, all right, I got to get this out somewhere. So if it fits, I'll put it here instead of here, I don't think you want to get into what John Borman, who directed Deliverance and Excalibur and Hope and Glory, he said something like, "This business is a lot about all the movies you didn't get to make." And I was kind of like, wow, that's a real depressing way of looking at it. Because everybody has a million projects that almost got made that didn't. But I think if you look at it only in that way, not to say that Borman only looks at it that way, but if you start to focus on that, I think you'll start to look at your career as an artist or as a filmmaker as a failure. And I don't think you should do that. I think you need to look at what you've accomplished and value that, and not just look at the things that didn't happen or aren't going to happen. Because that's going to far outweigh, the things that don't happen are going to far outweigh the things that did. So I don't know. I'm more preaching to myself at this point.
Well, I was just going to ask you that, I mean, because that sounds like great advice all of us could take. Do you do that on
I try. I really try. I think it's hard because all filmmakers are looking to do the next thing. And so you don't really take stock. You tend not to take stock of the things that you've already done. All you're looking at is what's in front of you. I think that's healthy because that means that you still have something that you need to express, and that drives you. And I definitely have that. But every once in a while, I'll try to take stock of, you made a few things, and a couple of these things you're actually happy with. And so when you're feeling really low about, oh, this isn't happening, or no one likes me, or I can't get hired, or why did he get the job and not me? Like you have to. I think you need to look at what you're creating, what you have created, and value that. And say, hey, you know what? You did that. And the chances are you're going to do something else too. So it's easy for me to sometimes fall into kind of like a funk where you're like, oh man, this is a lull, or this is a valley instead of a peak, and I think you just have to kind of look at the whole thing. It's like you can't just look forward, because then you may be denying yourself some of your own accomplishments. Even if you've only done one thing, even if you've only done a short, even if you've only done one short and you're trying to get your feature made and it's like you're having trouble, look to the short that you have made or the script that you've written. Maybe it's only a script. Look to that as a source of, hey, look, I've done this. This got done. So it's not impossible,
But then again, most artists are not on this if you want to talk about the DSM-4 spectrum or what, I don't know if that's probably an outdated book, but most of them are on this wild thing, and that's all part of our nature, is that we do have these incredible highs and lows.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's the other thing that in answer to your question earlier about what does the 25-year-old not know, is that, and I said this, I've answered this question before, but that's it. No matter as much as you would love it to be this constantly building stepladder, it is this crazy, you can drop like a stone, and that just doesn't mean that you can't climb up again.
Right.
But that was a big surprise for me. When those valleys came, it was like, holy shit, it was like the end of the world. Like, I cannot believe it. But you survive,
Sure.